Here we go. We are live. Welcome, everybody. Jump in here in a few minutes. Got a conversation. I'm excited to join a couple of my friends to join me for this conversation today. So, hope everybody's having a great Friday. Hopefully, spring is on the way as we have been navigating. We were just talking about a few minutes ago, just navigating some of the craziness here in Texas. Many of you have probably heard about all the power outages and the snow slash ice that we got over a couple weeks ago. So that's been interesting time. So want to jump in today. Welcome everybody. I'm with my friends Chris Cummings and Josiah Rogers. Let's just jump in. We're gonna talk about what we learned from 2020, and we really wanted to pull these guys in who are on the front lines of ministry, and really just kind of pull back the curtains and say what are some things that God taught us in 2020. And it can be personally, maybe about our leadership, about ourselves, or it could be collectively about within our ministries. But let's do some introductions first. So Chris, why don't you jump on first, introduce yourself a little bit, let people know who you are, and then we'll circle around to Josiah.
Yeah, so like Andy said, my name is Chris Cummings. I'm the college pastor at Coastal Community Church down in Galveston, Texas. We serve predominantly the campus of Texas A&M University at Galveston, which is the smallest public university in Texas. It's our staple, I guess. We're proud of it. So the school's also getting progressively smaller, so it's going to be really hard for someone to take that title from us. But yeah, let's see, I've been married for close to 5 years now. It'll be 5 years in April. We have 4 amazing foster kids in our home that we're hoping to adopt in the next 2 months. And I've been doing ministry for 6 years, something like that.
Cool. Awesome. Okay, Josiah, why don't you give people a little peek of who you are?
Josiah Rogers. I live in Denton, Texas, do ministry at the University of North Texas, Texas Women's University. And I've been here for a long time. We moved up here in the year 2000. My wife got her master's at North Texas and been here since then. I've been doing college ministry since 2008. Have 5 kids. My oldest is 17, about turned 17, and a junior in high school, getting ready to go to college herself. So they're all girls, have all girls. Anyway, it's a busy life. It feels busy.
Yeah. Josiah and I often will talk about just once you get into having teenagers, it feels like you're basically chauffeur all the time. Every day you're just living in a car for hours and hours, going from one place to the next place. So yeah. That's good. Hey, let's start out the conversation this way. Let's just kind of talk about the shift that 2020 may have caused you to have to take a pivot within your ministry. What were kind of some major kind of pivots or shifts that had to be made as COVID began to move forward and affect so many college ministries around the country?
I'll go. I think Chris and I may have the same answer on this one, but I do think it's funny because I do think God was like preparing us ahead of time for the changes in COVID, because we had already started to put in place like the idea of doing things smaller. We wanted to move away from bigger groups being the big, that's the main thing that we're doing, to smaller groups. So we'd moved that way the previous fall of 2019, and it was a difficult shift. I think a lot of people felt uncomfortable with that. It was challenging. But then once we were going into COVID, we didn't have to change as much. Like it wasn't as big a change as it could have been, for sure. So we were able to kind of still do smaller groups on Zoom, and then eventually we met in person. We'd meet outside and but small groups, meaning like 4 or 5 people. So a very small life group, and being able to walk through life together and in close relationship, talk about the word, things like that. And so because that was the emphasis, it didn't feel quite as drastic as a shift of like, oh, just shut down like anything that we had. But the other thing that was really hard was just access to campus. So I think all campuses are different, but ours was pretty locked down. Technically, I'm still not supposed to be on campus at all, even though the dean of students has been a little bit like, there's flexibility. but that's been like the harder thing. So you can't do much. Couldn't get tables or rooms or have meetings on campus. Even off campus, they didn't want student orgs having meetings, so it was just challenging.
Yeah,
quite a bit.
How about you, Chris? What were some kind of pivots and shifts that you had to make as COVID rolled out?
Yeah, Josiah, that sounds very oddly familiar. That's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
We the year before COVID, we started making this like very similar shifts into the DNA of our ministry, really trying to shift away from more of an attractional approach to a big midweek gathering and more towards a ownership approach of our students owning the vision of disciple making and multiplication. And so we started instilling that more into them. Once COVID hit, we were not allowed on campus. Only faculty, staff, and students of the campus were allowed on. And so our midweek gathering used to be hosted on campus. And so we couldn't keep going with that anymore. And we couldn't even justify taking it off campus because, just like Josiah said, that they didn't want student organizations really doing that either. Like they wanted to make sure that like they were being safe and spread out and all that stuff. And so luckily, we did spend like the last year really trying to shift towards a disciple making approach and model. And so one of the things that we did over the summer was we realized that everyone, all of our students' summer internships just got canceled because of COVID. And so that freed up the whole summer for literally all of our leaders. And so we spent the entire summer, about 10 weeks of the summer, from June to the start of the fall in August, walking through just some disciple making curriculum and teaching our students what it means to multiply. And we told them from the beginning that if we're going to baptize anyone, if we're going to grow this ministry, if we're going to reach freshmen, if any of that's going to happen this year, it's going to be on the backs of the students that are leading in this ministry, because our staff cannot be on campus to meet students, to set up tables, to gather students, none of that. And so they had to own it. And it was cool to watch through, the fall of 2020 and even to now, watching them take ownership of that in a really major way.
Yeah. So here's one of my convictions about 2020 is that in a lot of ways, 2020 just exposed our ministries for all the strengths and the weaknesses that were there, right? In a very profound way, like we've never seen it before. So if we had strong leadership, that was exposed. If we had weak leadership, that was exposed. If we had pushing into disciple making, or we were attractional, or community was weak, or whatever that looked like, it was exposed. And so here's what I would love to kind of throw on the table for our Friday conversation for the next few minutes is, what did God teach you in your ministries about 2020? And it can be in two different categories. You can think collectively maybe about your ministry, but also maybe even personally. So whoever wants to kind of jump in on that conversation, we'll wrap back and forth for a few minutes. And just what did God teach you about your ministry yourself in 2020?
I can go first. I think personally, so this is on the personal side, we all, anybody in ministry is fairly insecure. So I just think I found that to be true. But you're insecure. You're like, man.
That's why we go into ministry.
Right.
Yeah. That's why we go in the first place.
But there's this feeling of like, that I need to prove myself, I need to prove you prove your worth in some way to God. Whatever, things that you might not even think that are there in your heart, like, and it does get exposed when numbers go down typically. So, and I found that with myself. I was like, man, God's revealing my own insecurity, like my, my need for worth or whatever value in myself that comes from the quote unquote ministry success. So like whatever that looks like. And so I felt like that was something I wrestled with a lot, of just like, okay, well, what is living a successful life for Jesus look like? And what does it look like for me as a pastor? And it can't be tied to kind of outward stuff, out in the number of people coming to church. And so I think that was something that God was dealing a lot with in my heart, just like over hitting, excuse me. It's the COVID.
It's COVID got it.
Oh, no.
COVID got you.
I was eating Fritos shortly before I got on here. There's a little bit of Frito stuck in my throat.
Okay, we're recording it, so everyone's gonna be able to see this forever.
Just hitting some of the insecurity in me. Just saying, Josiah, what is it? What is it that you're actually doing? Is your worth and value in my relationship with the Lord, or is it in, how my ministry looks in some ways? And so I felt like that was important for me personally to wrestle with.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of that, and I think one of the big things I think for us as a ministry was COVID really gave us the opportunity to kind of rethink what our wins and what our values really are. In the past, we valued success based off of the total number of people that came to a gathering, and COVID gave everyone an excuse as to why a lot of people aren't showing up, And so we took that excuse and said, let's not measure value and success by numbers, We still care a lot about it, like if you have 0 freshmen coming, that's concerning, right? But we started to drift away from that more and more. And I think through that realized how influenced we really were by how big our gatherings were from in the past. And the more we drifted towards caring more about discipleship and caring more about students being truly connected with other students and deeper conversations within these smaller groups. And once we cared more about that, I think it showed me more how even though I wanted to be discipleship and wanted to be disciple making and evangelistic, how still I cared so much more about how many people were coming to our gatherings on a weekly basis. And so that shift in value and that shift in what's a win, I think exposed more and more where our values really were in the years past. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Did that shift happen like primarily with you, Chris, or was it like kind of a group? Did y'all work on it together?
I mean, I would say it initiated from me, but we all kind of rallied behind it. And really this class of leaders that we have right now are leaders that we've been really trying to pour into them of becoming disciple making. And so from the very beginning, we were we were just really kind of commissioning them to campus. And really for me and my 2 residency staff members, we had to be completely hands off. And, we were there to help coach and help encourage and champion, but they had to take it and own it and truly live it out. And so kind of week in and week out, when we would mainly just focus in on our student leaders, and we would ask them a lot of questions about how things are going in their group ministries and stuff like that. And very, very little of that conversation was how many people are coming. Most of that conversation is, what's the fruit of the conversations in those groups looking like? Where's the growth going? Who are some people that you want to invest in that could be future leaders or that you want to disciple? Those were more of the conversations we were having, rather than, hey, did you still have 10 this week, or did you suck and only have 5? And so that language started to shift more and more and more towards kind of disciple making language, rather than just numerically, are we growing as a ministry?
Yeah. I'm curious, Josiah, because you talked about your personal, maybe some of your insecurities. Kind of same question I would throw back on you. Do you feel like were you seeing that consistent within your team, or do you think that was more of a personal thing that you were wrestling with?
It probably was in our staff team a little bit too. It's especially if you've been, doing things a certain way for a while and you feel successful in that way, you're like, oh, this is the way it works for me, or this works well. And then feeling like you had to adjust that I think that brought up, I mean, for me, it was true. I think it was the same for our staff. The feeling of like, okay, well, I've been doing discipleship a certain way, and it's felt like it's worked pretty well for me the last several years. And now I've got to figure out something new, and I don't feel real confident in that. So I'd say that took us a little while to work through.
Yeah.
Say, okay, God, what is my value here, and how do I do it well?
Yeah. I'm curious about, like, for either of you, when it comes to like other people, were there any surprises, both positively and negatively, about how maybe where you thought people were at, and then maybe they surprised you by being in a different spot than you thought that they were pre 2020?
Sure.
Yeah. I think we saw kind of both ends, where we saw some students like really step up in ways, that were just truly remarkable and amazing, kind of things that we were like, I don't know if I see this in you. And then all of a sudden we're like, okay, now we do. It's like kind of thing. And then, I mean, at the same time, I think we saw a lot of people that, COVID gave everybody an excuse to not be involved. Right. And I think we saw a handful of students also like take that option as well, of just like, this is now my out. And so kind of both ends a little bit for us.
How about you, Josiah? Same thing, or?
Yeah, same thing. I think might have more examples on the negative than the positive, but there were there's one guy that's he's a sophomore this year. He's one of our leaders, but last year he was around as a freshman, but barely. He's barely involved, not he was smoking a lot of pot and, kind of involved in the party scene. But then he came back this fall and was like, man, I gotta follow Jesus and give up a lot of that, and is doing really well. So that's on the positive side. And then on the other side, same thing Chris said, a number of people that you thought, I thought, oh, these are quality leaders. They're gonna still be here. They just didn't have the resilience. I would say it's like, it was just whether they were looking for an excuse to kind of like to step out, or whether it's just, who knows? It's hard to know. But yeah, they've been gone, and I don't necessarily think they're going to come back. So it's like, it feels like, there was both of those sides that happened.
Yeah. I'm curious about like because I think one of the things that it's important for us to lead as leaders to do is to say, what does this cause us to do moving forward? Right. So if something like COVID were to happen again, let's say in 2 years, or 3 years from now, what would you say is something that needs to be developed, worked on, focused in on your ministry moving forward, that will put you in a stronger position if some type of thing were to happen like this again?
I mean, I would say just, lessen, like trying to get students to become more and more, especially student leaders, to become more and more and more independent, to where they can step out into those spaces and, be able to lead, well. And like, like having staff still be there to like coach, train, equip, empower and encourage all those different things, like 100%. But like, man, I think if COVID taught me anything, like, you cannot rely on programmatic ministry. Like God just took it away. Like literally 2020, God took everyone's gathering away and their budget. And so like one of the big things I learned is you just can't fully rely on it, because at any moment it could just be gone. And we have to invest in especially those leaders, and especially those students who are in, and really develop them to own it and get it and have a heart to multiply and make disciples. And so if COVID were to happen again in 3 years, one, I'd be really sad. I'd be like, that's not a long enough break. But two, I mean, I would spend the next 3 years trying to develop and ingrain a decentralized, multiplying disciple making culture as much as I most possibly can, so that when literally the world, when literally everything gets decentralized because it's forced to, you're ready to go and run in that way.
Yeah, it does feel like like to me coming out of this year, there's more opportunity for different models in American Christianity than, I don't know, that maybe we've ever had. I mean, at least in the last several years for sure, just opportunity to do things differently, that are not, not just a big service with 3 songs and a 30-minute teaching, and figuring out like can we make disciples in models that are other than that. And so it feels like that this year gave us that opportunity at least to question that, like, which would have been so hard. It was hard when you're like, oh, we have success and every other church does it this way, and the church down the street is doing it this way, and they're seeing all these people, come to Christ, and it does feel like God just shook that up a little bit. It was just like, man, I want to try to change, at least shake up the willingness that you have to try something new. And that's what I feel like for me is like coming out of it is like, man, what am I willing to try new things that don't look like the traditional model that we've had in the US for forever, and see what happens. and it feels like less of a risk. So whereas it might've felt like a giant risk 2 years ago, so that idea of like unpredictability, man, we don't know when the next COVID is going to happen, So in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, let's prepare for that as if it is going to happen, or we can't just rely on a particular model or way of ministry, and think differently, think through values again, go back to principles, and say, can we do this totally differently? And so that feels exciting for me. Like that feels hopeful for the most part coming out of this year. Of like, I feel a little more freedom to think creatively about ministry, and not just do it the way it's always been done.
I remember before like all this happened, like I would meet college pastors, and I'd be like, my first question, I was like, so what does your midweek look like or whatever? And they're like, some of them are like, we don't run a midweek. And I'm like, then what do you do? Like, because like before we started shifting more and more toward, decentralized multiplication and stuff like this, like, how do you as a college pastor spend your time? Like you're like, if now I'm like, oh, I get it. Like, but like it forces you to really kind of see what Josiah was saying, see with new lenses and from different perspectives.
That's good. So here's, you
want to go ahead. Going on that same thought, I've been thinking a lot about like, we just finished reading as a staff team, we read The Forgotten Ways by Alan Hirsch, and he talks about in there like this idea that there's a number of people that are already attracted to church. They think of church as a positive thing, and that's, who knows what that is exactly. His numbers are like 60-40 in the US. 40% of people view church as good and attractive, and 60 don't. I do think in Texas it's probably, there's more people that think of church as good than bad. But his point is this: those numbers are only going to get further as we go along. More and more people are going to not think church has any answer for them. And he's like, well, are we going to just keep trying to do the same thing to reach more of the percentage of the people that already like church, or are we going to be willing to change our model to reach people that don't? And I do think COVID a little bit accelerated that in my mind. It's like there's more people coming out of 2020 that just don't view church as having any answer at all. It's like, oh, how are we going to, so having a church service, and even no matter how attractional you make it, they're not going to care. It doesn't matter. So like, how do you live incarnationally with those people? And how am I training my students to? How am I doing it? Am I modeling it? Is our staff doing it? Are we living in such a way, like in a very incarnational way, around people who are non-Christians and don't really have any, don't have any propensity to visit a church on a Sunday or a small group or anything like that. But can we get involved with them in some other natural ways? That's the type of thing we're trying to think about coming into this next year, is like fundamentally shifting our thoughts in terms of incarnational ministry to reach people that are not going to be that shrinking piece of the pie, who already think that church is great.
Yeah. So here's where I'd love to land the plane, is this question about, if you're to look back 10 years from now, back on 2020, what do your what are you praying that you'll be able to say about 2020 and what it did for your ministry locally?
That we made it. I
We made it. Oh man, we made it.
I was like, that's a really good question.
I think that, yeah, I mean, you want it to be like a springboard. I mean, that's what I'm hoping. It's like, okay, just it sprung new ideas and new ways of thinking, and in such a way that like we could shift some of the foundational things that's going to be really healthy. It's hard to say right now. I don't know if you feel this way, Chris, but it like the future looks more murky, you know, like I'm not convinced going into the fall. In years past, I would have thought, oh man, I have this down. I know how to get 300 freshman names in the fall and feel pretty like confident that we can follow them up and get them into small groups. Like a couple years ago, I would have said that without hesitation. Whereas going into this fall, I'm like, I don't know. I have no idea how we're going to do it. And so it feels like very murky now, but I'm hoping that, yeah, if I do look out 10 years and look back, you think, oh, it sparked new ideas, it sparked creativity, it sparked ways of thinking that we just wouldn't have had, that's really worked out well. But there's no guarantee. We'll probably try some stuff that does not work at all this next year, and then hopefully we'll have some that really goes, you know, incredibly well. So
yeah. I agree, and you know, it really, like, all of this really did force us to, like, we have to like rethink how, you know, like what Josiah was saying, go get freshmen and disciple students and build how do you build up future leaders when your staff can't be around them, you know? Like that's a hard question to ask, and even potentially even harder to answer, right? And so like there's some things that, like, you know, we did this last fall because we had to think differently, that I think might be the way we do things forever, like moving forward. We were looking back, like, just so our strategy, for an example, to reach freshmen in the past was invite everyone you can to our midweek. Once they get there, we'll push groups, and hopefully we'll get the vast majority of them to sign up. And even though that is what would happen in the past, what we would find is that a lot of people would sign up night one, and not a lot of people would show up to actual group, and not a lot of people would become more and more consistent in that group. And then COVID hit, and we can't have a mass gathering to get people in groups. And so one of the big questions that we asked as a staff over the summer was, how on earth are we going to get people plugged into groups? And our solution to that was, our leaders are going to have to go to campus, live missionally, intentionally meet other people, and invite them in to community groups. And so instead of having a massive gathering saying, everyone come to us and then hopefully you can get plugged into a group, all of our student leaders went across campus to meet different people at different times of the day, and start conversations, build relationships, and invite them into their community group. And what we found this fall, so fall 2020, when everything's crazy, we had more people sign up for community group than any fall semester in the past. And we saw that better community was formed. Like, we have far greater consistency inside of those groups than ever before. And I think a big reason for that was because our leaders were building relationships first and inviting them into their group, rather than just saying, hey, why don't you go be another one of the many people that come to our gatherings, and maybe I'll see you there, and maybe you'll jump into my group. But there was this relationship and connection from the very, very beginning. And so I don't know if we'll ever go back to the old way of, like, getting students plugged into groups, or even outreaching to freshmen and different things like that. Like, there's some things that I missed that I wish we could have done, like providing lunches on campus and stuff like that I'm sure would be helpful, that we weren't able to do. But when we decided to send our students out to live missionally on campus, to go outreach to new people and bring them into their own ministry, that changed the game for us. And 10 years from now, my hope would be that our students are living missionally like that just because we can open the doors back to a midweek, or open the doors back to some of these programmatic outreach things, that it doesn't stop them from taking ownership of it, and it doesn't stop them from doing their own personal outreach to students all across the campus.
That's good.
Good.
That's great. Well, hey, let's wind it down right there. Here's the encouragement to everybody who's listening or rewatching this at some point down the road. It's important for us to step back, evaluate, see where God is working, and see what he was trying to do in these moments. I think so often what we do is we quickly just kind of bypass the moment, and we don't take the opportunity to mine out the things that God is doing, to step back and evaluate and see where the wins are, to see where the opportunities of the Spirit of God was to work. And so, I mean, I appreciate you guys coming on and jumping on this call today, because I think that that's an important thing that we need to, as leaders, demonstrate for others of how do we assess, evaluate, and begin to ask the question, God, what are you doing? What are you stirring in us? And how is this going to shape us and shift us as we begin to move forward? So I appreciate you guys jumping on a call today. Hey, here's what I'd love to do as we finish off. What did God teach you in 2020? And so I'd love for you to comment, reach out to somebody, let us know what God was doing in your ministry and you personally in 2020, and maybe what are going to be things that are going to be different as you begin to move forward as well. So Chris, Josiah, thanks for a few minutes today, jumping on, encouraging a lot of our leaders, and just appreciate your guys' stories.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Okay. Sounds good, everybody. We'll talk to you the next Friday conversation.